My subject tonight is all about 2 meters because I've been asked by new licensees, particularly, you know, why I'm so interested in 2 meters and what they can get out of it, because all they do these days is get hold of a baofeng and that's it, you know, and talk through the local repeater. And well, it was very, very different from me when I started in a good while ago. So, right, that's when I started. That's me. That's in Germany after the Second World War. I suppose I must be 1 there, so that would have been 49. Right, yeah. The colouring is, of course, done artificially by my brother. The uniform is totally bogus. My dad had to wear that. He was involved in the Cold War, the setting up of the partitioning of Germany, Russian areas, American areas, and so on. And but the population just thought he was posted there as part of the reconstruction of Germany, and you know, sort of like a police force. But he was actually a spook, and he brought home radios. Now, that's not the radio he brought home, and it's not the one I remember him bringing home, but it's just the one he had was small, much smaller than that. I wasn't able to find an exact match on the internet. He was also the first person, when we came back to the UK, I must have been 6 or 7, and he told me that the practical wireless existed. He saw an ad in the paper. And ever since then, I think almost without a break, I've had practical wireless. And it's still going strong, probably one of the few that have gone that long. And actually I can tell you that it's available free as well through the library in Bendigo and Castlemaine. Libby is a magazine subscription service which you get for free having a library card. So there's no excuse for not having copies of Practical Wireless. The one on the right here is a fairly recent one, as you can see, because it reports on the Rockall expedition. A bizarre expedition on a bit of rock off the UK coast. But anyway, it's a great magazine, and I recommend it. My parents also helped me build crystal sets when I was about 5 or 6. It turned out my mother was trained in electronics as well. I never knew this, but she actually ran one of those, or she was involved in the chain home stations, which are those big antennas on the coast with the cross pieces and things like that. Apparently they weren't bombed at all because the Germans thought, well, they didn't think they were important. They'd done a recce around the UK in a hot air balloon, an airship before the war, and they'd done a survey, spying really, you know, and they would, I suppose they pretended it was sort of an exchange or something, you know. But actually it was those that made the mistake of not realizing they were radar things. And also I spent every weekend as a junior school kid taking radios apart that my dad brought home. So I'd take them apart, put them in a box, and then next weekend I'd get them all out again. It was a lot of years later it took when I could start putting them back together again, you know, understanding them. But anyway, this is me. I'm not in the picture actually, but the school I was at, the boarding school, while my dad was doing more spooky stuff in Singapore, was in Bournemouth in the south of England. And I was there for the year 11 and 12. And so we were supposed to buy or wear those hats, those stupid hats, boaters, especially when we went out of the school grounds at weekends, you know, shopping and what have you. And I didn't want to do that. I thought they're stupid. I don't want to look like that round town. I'll get beaten up for a start. So I borrowed the hat off a friend, and as I left the school, I hid it in a bush and went shopping, come back, put the hat on, walked back in. They twigged to this and told me, you've got to get a hat. So I sent my parents a letter to send me 18 and sixpence, the cost of the hat, which they eventually did, presumably with postal order or something like that. And then I went and bought the Radio Amateur's Handbook from the RSGB. And I've still got it, this brown book. I had it out today. It's too heavy to bring. I wanted to show you. But anyway, I've got that book. Read it, and then went to the local college. That's me in the grounds. There's my pass slip. I went to the Bournemouth Municipal College of Technology and Commerce, so like TAFE, down the road, and I said to them, I want to take the amateur radio exam. And they said, well, you haven't done the course. I said, well, I don't want to. I just want the exam. And they said, well, we do a course and then the exam. I must have been convincing, because they said, all right then, and they enrolled me just for the exam. And I went back another night, got permission to leave school for 3 hours, and did this exam. It was essays those days, like it must have been here, I think. But, and there's my pass slip, and dated this 65. Well, I didn't get a license straight away because you couldn't get a full license without 12 words a minute Morse code. And that had not entered my head to do that. So there I am. I've just got this pass slip. But I was very keen at school. I started a radio club, and a few of the pupils joined it. We'd meet at lunchtime. I don't think we had a radio exactly, but we used to talk about it and read the practical wirelesses and what have you. And the physics teacher, I remember, used to come as well. He was interested in what we were doing. I've actually joined a Facebook group that talks about those years at this St. Peter's School. And I was reminded of the guy's name, because I could never remember the physics teacher's name. We used to tease him a bit. And I'm kind of a bit sorry about some of the things I did. I have to tell you one thing. He asked somebody to bring in an air rifle one day. We're going to measure the speed of the pellet. So he puts it in a clamp. He's got a sand pile at the end of the classroom, and sensors, of course, to see when it passes. And, loads it up, and he says, right, back boys, And as he fired it, I threw a ball bearing in the back of the room. And he goes, blimey. He says, what was that? Ricochet, probably. And he did it again. And all the boys could see me this time, and they were laughing. And he said, I think we'll pack this up, And so, he did a wonderful job. He got me through the exams and everything. I think I wouldn't have done it without him. Well, it was a day school as well. Okay, so we had day boys in the class, and he was a lay teacher, because it was a religious school, De La Salle brothers, but they had lots of civilian teachers, as it were. So yeah, he was one of them. Right, that's my... we used to go out at weekends. I must have looked up a call book or something, because I looked up people who were within walking distance of the school. And you wouldn't do that these days, but what happened then was that we used to knock on the door. Maybe a group of 3 of us at weekends. Can we look at the gear? Oh yeah, And we go in the huge rooms of junk, old radios. We're talking still 67 time, so it was all ex-army stuff. But those wonderful people would demonstrate Morse code to us and things like that. So, it was a great weekend out. So I was still interested in radio all this time, but still not able to do anything about it, because there wasn't anything other than this full call, which needed the Morse. So I leave that place. I go and work at the BBC for a couple of years. There were a few amateurs on the staff, as you'd expect, and there was a radio club, so I belonged to that. But again, no operation or anything like that. Then I went to Sussex University and built a few things, and that's where I come to this mystery in a minute. Because I moved to Nottingham and the rules changed. So in about 73, I was allowed to operate on 2 meters and 70 centimeters, crystal controlled, AM, with my current, and get a license. So I got G8 HIM. The G8 meant it was VHF only. So yeah, G3, G4s were for general HF things. And so I built a circuit, a transmitter receiver, and I spent a lot of time trying to talk to John G4ANS, a young bloke. I was about 20, he was 16. We must have met somewhere, I can't really remember, I must have joined the club there. Anyway, he used to live about 5 miles away, so every night I'd try and transmit, you know, and he'd say, no, I can't hear you. And it would just go on, and I meant to bring my logbooks today, because I've got them from that period. It was compulsory to log every call, so I've got called, you know, G4ANS, nothing heard. And then there's one day where I heard him. And that was marvellous. So that was the start of it. On 2 meters this is. Now, this little box here that I've got on the screen is full of cards from the time. I used to write things down. No photocopiers available easily. So I used to write these circuits down on the card and keep them. And half of that box is to do with electronic music and Robert Moog's synthesizer circuits. I used to go down to London and get them out of a journal of the American Audio Engineering Society. And I'd have to actually ask them to get that thing, and I'd copy it out on the card and bring them back and put them in there. And the other half were radio things. And that's my card from 1973. And I know I built this because I used it for quite a few years. A single FET regenerative receiver on VHF. It's hard to believe, isn't it? And if I'd seen that sketch, I'd think, you know, it's completely made up. But last night, I went on the net and on the back of this card, it says SWM May 1973. So, Shortwave magazine, I must have been getting Shortwave magazine at the time. Don't recall, but I must have been, because that is the original circuit. And I must have extracted that regenerative part, no preamp, and an amplifier. I must have had something external. But for years, I used that as a 2-meter receiver, AM. And the band wasn't really crowded, so the selectivity was good enough. And then I vaguely remember this. 72 meg crystal, doubled up to 2 meters, and then, AM, transformer modulated. That must have been the difficult bit, because that's the bit that took me a while to get going. We had to get, we were crystal controlled, so I must have got one that was in the band, doubled up in the band. We had this scheme where everybody would be crystal controlled, and so if you called CQ, you'd say tuning high to low. Now stop me if you want to tell me about what happened here, because I don't know if it was similar when you were given the no code part of things. But we tuned down, and if you had a crystal at the high end, you get the first chance to talk to somebody. And in contests, it was the same sort of thing. We had contests and things. I was able to talk to people within about 20 miles of Nottingham with this. And the article itself says that they've done 40 miles with it. 100 milliwatts this thing is, because those transistors, of course, are very new in that period. I was regularly blowing them up because I didn't know what they were doing. This is all about Lecker lines. The radio inspector turned up. I've never seen a radio inspector since. But he turned up and he said, how do you measure your frequency? And I said, oh, Lecker lines. And he goes, oh, how do you do that then? And I started getting out bits of wire and stretching on the table and everything like this. I'd never done this before. I just knew Lecker lines from the theory, you know. And I'm messing around and going, And he goes, oh, never mind. You know, but the ability to measure your frequency was important, of course, because there was not the frequency meters like we have now, or anything like that. At the same place that I lived, oh, that's not it. We lived in a mansion. It was split into flats, but it was one of these old stately homes in the UK. Suitable for students, they said in the ad, you know, rough as guts. But we moved up to Nottingham from down south because it was cheaper to live, and it certainly was. And my daughter learned to ride her bike in the place because we had these rooms. We were in one of the wings, and there was a corridor down the middle, big rooms with 3 bay windows in each one, you know, and no furniture, just a bed sort of in the room, and friends staying, you know. And she used to ride her bike round and go through the doors and down there and then back again, you know, and stuff like that. Now I had this little cubicle at the end of the corridor where I had my shack. And I bought a big rig like this, valve transmitter from the Culham Laboratories, which was a radio research place, radioactive, should I say. You know, nuclear, that's the word I'm struggling for. Nuclear place, and I brought it at a sale, amateur, you know, a ham fest. Anyway, I completely rebuilt the inside. It was a 28 meg rig, I think, something like that, and I made it into a 2 meter AM rig, 40 watts, you know, really going up market. Anyway, I was sitting there with it on the table, and with the lid off, and then I somehow got 400 volts across me. And there I was, and I remember just tightening up like that, and everything's gone black, you know. And I fell backwards, and the radio fell onto my knees and off my hands. So that's why I'm here telling you, because I nearly killed myself, you know. And that was the day I decided not to work with valves anymore. You know, 12 volts was my limit. I haven't actually done anything since. Yeah, and then 5 minutes later, the lady comes up with her Alsatian dog, and I said, what took you so long? And she said, oh, it sounded like you were being murdered, so I had to get the dog. Yeah, well, it was pretty, yeah. Anyway, so next one. We moved to the house, the one up the street, where we got a flat roof there. See that? Fantastic. Flat roof. This was high up. To the south, that way, it was just clear, you know. Further that way, the other way, up the hill, you can see there's a hill. There was a water tank at the top. This is in the centre of Nottingham. They were rebuilding all the way around. There were slums everywhere down there, but these houses were sold very cheaply to people who had to renovate them. So I learnt a lot of skills there, making it habitable. But the thing is, the flat roof, I don't know if you can see it, but there's a little square on the top there. And I made that. I got the saw out and cut a trapdoor. And the roof was made of, you know, the pitch covered fabrics or something, you know, to make it waterproof. So I sort of folded it up and put some wood around so that it had a, you know, and then the top came on like that, and I had bolts to hold it on. Anyway, that got me out there. But then I got a 20-foot pole, and I'll show you that in a minute. But the 20-foot pole was a thick-walled scaffold pole, and I got it delivered to where I worked, and I kept it in the basement there for a long time. But in the end, I had to bring it home. So, you know, it's not a thing you can bring home in a taxi. I actually walked 3 miles home from work carrying it. And you know, to get across the road, you'd have to, rather than walk that way, you know, you hold on to that way and then run across the road. And try not to kill people by, you know, making sure it was down at the front so that you wouldn't poke somebody's eye out if they suddenly stopped or something. So it's a nightmare. Anyway, there I am. I got the pole home. Now, I don't know if you can see this, but there's an antenna at the top, goes through a hole in the flat roof. It goes through a hole in the ceiling into the hallway, the stairwell, and you know, it was about that far down, and I could stand on a chair and turn it. Clever, eh? Well, anyway, came the day when I had this 8/8 slot-fed antenna, which I'll talk about more. I had to haul that up the house. I had to stand on the roof, haul it up on a rope, stand on the roof there, lift the thing up vertically, walk it over to the hole, down, and let it go down into there and onto the floor. And then I went down. I mean, can you believe how stupid that was? Yeah, but I just did things like that, you know, cutting holes in roofs. Anyway, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. It looked like that. It wasn't that. This is off the net. But I've got the exact same antenna, 8/8 slot fed, made by J-Beam in England. And it would rotate when I stood on the chair. The cable went down the outside of the house and into the second floor. Yes, not the ground floor, the first floor, and not the top. I had a radio in that room. So it was brilliant. 2 meters. And I've got the aerial still. I've only got 5 elements, 5/5. And I've lent it to Luca, the young bloke, and he's going to return it. But I took did this rather accurate drawing of it in case anybody wants to copy it, because it was a fabulous aerial. And so I'm going to be, I don't put it up. I won't be putting it up. But anyway, the first real proper rig was this Liner 2. Now, did you ever see the Liner 2 here? It was 23 channels on single sideband on 2 meters. And you can see that it was probably a rejigged CB rig with 23 channels. You know, the VCOs and things probably were the same as in a CB rig. But it was fantastic, and it had the reputation of having awful spurious signals throughout the band. But of course we didn't have anything to measure it with, so we weren't worried. But you know, you get articles in the local, in the amateur radio magazines about how awful they were. Right, Nottingham. This was in Nottingham, and I got a job at the university. And so I met Chris. Now that's Chris G4HCW, who you've all met. He gave us talks and things like that. He's from South Australia. He emigrated after we did, because he came for a conference. He said, "You guys live the way you live." I said, "I'm coming for that." So he emigrated, and he now lives in Adelaide and works at Bath University in the UK on a part-time basis, because he's quite cluey apparently. You know, he's not just a radio amateur. We ran the radio club. We kept it going over the holidays because, of course, all the students go, and then the continuity's not there. So we actually made sure everything was running and everything, and we used to go on contests and things like that, and use the university's call sign. Well, you all know this, but at this time, I was studying the weather maps and learning about propagation. They go round the other way in the UK, of course. These are the winds around a high pressure zone. And you all know that if you see a map like this, the propagation is really good. It could be really good. And when there's stable air, that forms a nice reflector. And for any beginners, maybe watching or anything like that, the fact is that you assume that the Earth is 4/3 its size when you're trying to work out the horizon with radio propagation, because there's a natural tendency for it to follow the curve and things like that. So I think there's a room here for teaching this sort of thing to newcomers, because what they don't realise by listening to FM stations, it's either there or not there, so you can't hear graceful fading and things like that too easily. But we were using single sideband on 2 meters, so we got to hear that beacons were going in and out, with QSB and things like that. And in fact, we discovered where's a bit about aircraft? Isn't it funny? I wrote this the other day. Here we go. Yeah, I was trying to find this article, a 3-part article in the RSGB, Radio Society of Great Britain, magazine that they have. It was in the 70s. It was called A Detective Story. It was about aircraft reflection, a detective story. And it was wonderful. They had these planes drawn out there, and the geometry of the wings and how that would reflect the signals and everything. And it proved that what we'd heard was from aircraft, because at the time, well, A, there weren't many aircraft, and B, it could have been something else. We didn't know for sure. And so this article convinced everybody that you could actually bounce signals off airplanes. I even heard an auroral opening from that place. Beaming north, I heard Swedish stations on 2 meters, which are right at the far, too far to hear normally, basically, but they were bouncing off the curtain and coming back. And I'll never forget the sound. Has anybody else heard the auroral on VHF? Okay. It sounds like whispering, because the curtain's doing this, and all the different signals, paths, mixing with each other, basically, on a complex fashion. So it was only once that I ever heard that, but it was fantastic. Well, not being licensed for HF, I worked Chris regularly, G4HCW. He'd go home from work, and we'd continue talking to each other on 2 meters, and then we'd talk through AO7, the satellite that was put up at that time. The frequencies were up on 2 meters, down on 10 meters, at least the ones we wanted to use. They were alternate days when they did something else. And you'll remember that rig, the FT290R, Dick Smith sold. So that was probably the first serious rig that I ever owned. But what we used to do in the UK is that if you bought a commercial rig, you first of all built in or had an external preamp, because we found that the manufacturers were being a bit cautious about getting too much gain in their radios because of cross-modulation and what have you. The police frequencies were very close to the amateur radio band, so you'd get all their telemetry and what have you interfering. So deliberately, we felt, lower gain than they could be. So what I did with this rig, again, it's a real cheek, is that I bought this rig for about $300 from Dick Smith, and I changed the first field effect transistor for a lower noise one, a surface mount. So you sit around with soldering, and get rid of this, yeah, and whack that in. Then I put a Mutec board. Oh, I think that's lost the... Anyway, Mutec is a little board like that, state-of-the-art preamp. It cost me $50, I think, or something. But it had the wiring diagram for building it into that rig so that it went from the aerial through to the receiver. And an absolute red-hot receiver. Afterwards, I used to, DX like crazy on that one. I've still got this rig, but it's gone funny, so I'm not as confident these days at fixing it. Remember the IC2A? I won one of those at Strictly Ham. I went to the opening of their new shop. Must be the current one that they had, We're talking 20 years ago or more. And I was the first person there, and I put my raffle ticket into the thing. They must have just tipped it up like that and taken off the top one, because I won it. And I was home by the time they rang me and everything. I had to go back there. But I was so pleased I got this rig. Absolutely, because a handheld was like everybody's dream. And I found that rig fantastic. Did a few mods on it, of course. Still got it. I've got to get rid of all this stuff, though, because it's just pointless. There's the inside of a microwave module's transverter. That was the only real way you could get on 2 meter sideband. 28 megs in, 28 megs out, and it was 2 meters was only 144 to 146 in the UK, so 28 to 30. It worked fine. I've got a bit of circuitry up the back there, detecting when there's RF and switching with RF rather than a switch. And it still works, that still works. The PA is in the box there, never opened the box. There's a preamp. I've got dozens of these preamps at home. Put a preamp in everything because I wasn't satisfied with the gain. Here's an FT7 that I used with the transverter. I put a switch on it so that I could get the full 10 meter band, 28 to 30. So I got crystals that would give me that. It's an 8-position switch. The first 4 positions I was going to have the CB band, 27 meg crystals, but I never did that. That's the Mutec board that I put in the FT290R. That's a 2 meter converter that I took out of an Italian receiver, and I used that converter in front of an SDR. So the SDR receives 0 to 28, 0 to 30, and if you put that in front of it, and Jim, who I see is online here, has got a fantastic version of this. He gave us a demonstration in Shawishak one day of how he's got things organized. But what I did is I put this in front of my receiver, and I was able to see the 2 meter band with 28 to 30. In fact, it will go to 32, that receiver, if you jiggle the settings, and you can then get the whole of the 2 meter band. A linear helps because this is a linear that works well with my FT817, and I'd also be telling any youngsters or newcomers that if they could ever see an FT817 or 818, get it, because even though it's only 5 watts, it's a fantastic receiver and on all the bands, so why not? I use it as a monitoring receiver now. I'll explain a little bit further on about what I do use it for. That's a 50 watt or 60 watt, but it's also got a transistor in it, a preamp for receive, and it actually does make a difference, and it's not too noisy, so it doesn't improve the signal to noise ratio. Okay, well, and again, for anyone who doesn't know about this, this is what I use what I now use on 2 meters is some of the digital modes. I prefer this to doing digital modes on HF because that's a lot easier. I want to see what's happening on VHF and when, you know, with the aurora and with all the different weather patterns and stuff. Now it says there VK3ZTE, 87 kilometers away, blah blah blah, 144.490 blah blah blah. Okay, I just left this. Now, here, the secret to my interest in 2 meters these days is this particular box. SDR Play is the company. It's a receiver, SDR receiver, of course. RSP1A is the type. They've got an updated model now, and that cost me about $200. And to my surprise, Neil got one shortly after I got one. And you enjoy it, don't you? Yeah. 0 to 2 gigahertz. You can see 10 megahertz in one go. It's also able to be remoted. That is, you put it somewhere and connect the internet to it in some way, which I've still yet to work out. And then you can watch it from your home location or whatever. And you can tune it and so on. But that's down the track. What I was doing here was very basic, and again basic because I want to show newcomers how simple things can be. You've got this receiver, you plug it into your computer, you run some software. I'll show you the actual software for running the receiver in a minute, but this WSJTX, as lots of you will know, receives audio signals, and you know, you basically put them in there, choose the modes. Up the top there you've got modes. It says whisper down below. I'd set it to whisper on 2 meters, and the receiver was set to the same frequency, and it was just spillage of sound from the receiver going back into the microphone, not even any connections. So again, people can do this mode with no other complications apart from getting that rig and getting the software for it. So as I say, I left this going, and that's what I saw when I got back. And that was the map that's on Whisper Watch. I'm not sure if it's on Whisper Watch. Anyway, it starts on Whisper Watch. I should have made a note of this. Anyway, those are all the signals that were received in the last hour from me taking that image. And ZTE is down in Melbourne, so it would be that one that's right next to the M. But you know, that's telling you quite a lot about propagation that's happening at that time. Now look at that one. That's the same time. The only other place in the world at that time was the UK, who's bothering with this. It's weird, isn't it? No other signals. Oh, Japan's got a couple. There must have been 2 blokes down the road, you know. Yep. So anyway, that's interesting. But of course, FT8 is available, JS8 call, all those other digital modes are available to you in the same way. Now this is the software I use for this one. It's called SDR++. It's either with a PP or an actual plus sign, plus. This is centered on 145.86. Well, it's close to 850, which is the output of the APRS beacon on Mount Alexander. And those little red pulses there are boo, boo from the APRS, sending packets out. And I had to quickly grab the screen, make a screen grab there to capture it. Now there is the satellite band, 145.910. I've got a system here that goes from 145.8 to 146, which is the satellite band. And that's what I find particularly useful. When you're listening on FM to this band, you just hear noise, pulses, and things like that. Here, you can actually see that when the Morse code thing comes on, it's very unstable on this particular satellite. You hear the whistle of the frequency changing, and then it goes into that thicker band is telemetry. So, you know, the transmitter turns on, unstable, stabilizes, and there's telemetry. And just next to it, where it's actually tuned, is the Morse code beacon. And I actually heard the ident when I was listening, but that's Morse code down that path there. So you can see how useful that is. If you just leave it running like that, you'll see all the satellites kind of coming through. Just recently, there are a whole bunch of new ones. Now this is, shows you weak signal work. I've tuned it to the VK3RGL beacon, which is down at Mount Anarchy. It's the club one down in Geelong. And if I can hear that, I know that my system's working properly, because it's absolutely just about on the noise level. And you can see where my red line is. Underneath it is the actual beacon. And what you can't see is that it's this QSB. It's slightly brighter and darker as it goes through the fading. And occasionally you see a big red mark, and I'm presuming that's meteor reflections, and certainly aircraft reflections. Sometimes you see that come very bright red because there's a plane flying over. And that's how I heard Mike's signal on FM one night during the net. He came up to 10 over 9 on FM, 2 meters, because a plane went over between us. And so again, what I try to do with the newcomers is tell them about these things. There's much more exciting things to do with 2 meters, even today, you know, than they say, nobody's on, nothing's happening. I say, well, you know, there are things you can do. Now, this is what you can do, there's a signal on 2 meters from Europe to America. How does that happen? Because they haven't done that yet. There've been FT8 signals between islands off the Europe and the America. This is Q65A, which is used in moon bounce. So that's a moon bounce signal between those two places. The software isn't clever enough to show you it actually going out and coming back, you know. But you're down in the records as going 10,000 miles, you know. That's the direct path. They don't count all that bit going up, coming down again for DX. Well, as most people know here, I've got very interested in emergency communications now. And I feel that 2 meters, it'll be the saviour, I think, of 2 meters, because you can see how little it's being used around the world. And in fact, in France, there was an effort to take the band back and sell it. And I'm sure that'll happen here before too long, you know. And there was also things like, I think the London Olympics, where they banned people from using the 2 meter band, because all the people marshalling had 2 meter rigs. And they said, we're going to be using it, so you can stop. And that's going to happen more and more. So if we want to keep it, then we have to find the things that it can do that no other things can do. So it's been great working with the Bendigo group, the Shire of Mount Alexander, which is where I am, and now Macedon's taking an interest with this an idea of radio watch, where people get trained up, not necessarily experts, not necessarily wanting to know all about the ins and outs of amateur radio, but want to learn about communication. And for that reason, we've been more involved with the CBers. I've got 2 CB rigs on my shelves. One of them's going to, right now, isn't it? Yeah, there's probably 4. Yes, they're live streaming it as we speak on channel 20 on 27 megs. And there's more people there on that tonight than I hear all week on amateur radio. So it's reminding me that it sounds like 2 meters when I started, you know. And so I'm quite keen on it and the idea of it now. And we do lots of things with the CBers, and lots of people are both amateurs and CB users nowadays, which is great. So I've got this rig that cost me $300. It's called a President McKinley. Terrific radio. I can hear lots of the signals that are on this checking in. There's like 40 people on. You've got no time to actually say anything. You just tell them your call sign, what your rig is, you know, and people are announcing things like, oh, it's an 897. You know, so they've jigged it to work on CB. I wouldn't be saying that if I'd modified a rig to. But anyway, and there's also, of course, UHF. We've got a UHF repeater right next to the VHF amateur radio repeater. Neil's busy involved with the community up Rochester with a CB repeater going in. I know Shepperton has always maintained a CB repeater for the community. So, you know, basically people who just want CB, fair enough. If they want to move over to amateur radio, great. You know, but there's room for everybody. We've got quite a few resilience groups around the place, in Castlemaine area and also in the Northern Rivers region, that we've been looking at their Facebook pages, how they're organising communities to get radios, because they were badly affected by the floods. People had to be rescued off roofs. There were people for 11 hours in a tree, you know, hypothermia. If they had a radio, they could surely got somebody who was listening. So that's what we kind of go on about a lot. And one resilience group in Castlemaine I heard was talking about me the other night, because what happened is this resilience group was set up during COVID for mothers who wanted to help with the children, childcare, the food, people without necessities and things like that. And then I gave them a talk about radio, because one of them contacted me. She'd heard about me. And I gave them a talk. It was a Zoom talk. Recently I gave a talk about community resilience and fire and emergency stuff with the Mount Macedon Club. And during that meeting I met some young blokes, around about 40, said, we want to join you because of that very reason. And so one of them's already a license. Within a month he got a license. He actually got a remote assessment after I'd brought him up to speed with what he needs to know. He came round for about 2 hours and I went through all the practical stuff with him, and off he went and passed. And now his colleagues are asking me to help them. So this is having an effect. It's bringing people in who know, who realise the importance of communications in those sort of situations. 2 meters being the main band that we use. Although I do have a rig on channel 5 on the UHF-CB, which is the emergency channel on that one. And, you know, the likelihood of it being activated in the town is probably remote, but out in the bush, you know, that would definitely need to be monitored. Most people that I know in amateur radio of that sort of length of time have actually been involved in rescues of some sort or other, either life-saving or equipment or like cars. In my case, I was at a folk camp up near Corryong, where that red mark is actually near Kosciuszko National Park. There's this camp, and I actually picked up a signal through a remote repeater there. Nobody else answered him. His car was off the side of the road and teetering over a drop, and they were holding it onto the road and talking. He had, I think, a rig in the car, so he was amateur, and they called for help. So I had to actually drive to the caravan park about 5 miles away and phone the SES and do da-da-da-da-da and negotiate this rescue, because they were in New South Wales. And I coordinated this. The SES were up there, and the police had heard about this, so they were going up there. It got messy. It got messy because of treading on each other's toes, because I was driving back to the camp after I'd sorted this all out, and the radiometers called me again and said the police said they want the SES called off. So I had to go back to the camp and call the SES and tell them the police don't want you. And anyway, they organised a tow truck and apparently rescued the person. And when I was just about to leave the caravan park, of course no mobiles, we're talking landlines then, the SES turned up. And they said, thanks so much for calling us, but the police over in New South Wales don't want us to go over. That sort of thing. So crazy stuff. I can go on for hours about these silly stories. But then this Cole was involved in a rescue of somebody who broke their leg. 2 hours drive from the main road. They had a motorcycle accident. And his story got written up in the amateur radio magazine from the WIA. But I bet you've all heard of something like that. So I'd be telling these newcomers there's no such thing as a radio watch if you don't have your radio on. So anytime anybody asks me about this particular group of people, I say you've got to have a situation where you can have your radios on all the time, on squelch. You've got them powered up if there's no power. And the car is an obvious place for sort of things like that when you're out and about. But when you're at home, it's good to have the simplex channel and the other one, monitoring. You never know who you might need to respond to. And as I say, radio watch isn't a radio watch. And I've heard people say, I've turned my mobile off because I don't expect any calls. Well, that's almost like Telstra providing a service and then turning it off, because they've been hacked or something. It's not good enough. And Graham constantly reminds me about people must have their communication plan as well as their escape plan and fire plan and communication plan. What are you going to do if this thing doesn't work in your pocket? And that's what I work on, and that's where I'm bringing more people into our activity as a result of that. And let's hope they take an interest in these other things that I'm talking about. It's not essential. Well, I'd like to thank the audiovisual people who are always here every month, doing a great show. Oh, yes, I suppose they... Have we? Oh, I'm glad I didn't know. I'd have been too embarrassed. Well, thanks for joining us, if you can hear me, because I'm normally the person on the Zoom at home in Castlemaine, but tonight, of course, I wanted to come in and plug in. So, thank you very much.